How's it going out there, YouTube? My name is Jesse, and I am the curator for the Golden Age, and this is Lost Heroes of the Golden Age. You're just going to let me say it this time?
What?
We're doing a video. Did you want to participate?
How did this dynamic boy become the dynamic boy from Project Superpowers?
That's because that dynamic boy didn't become the one in Project Superpowers.
What are you talking about?
It's the second dynamic boy.
Second dynamic boy?
Yes. The dynamic boy from Dynamic Comic Books of Volume 2.
Who's responsible for this?
It's this guy. He wanted to, he requested the video.
I meant the person who's responsible for creating this.
There's nobody credited with either creation.
You're really gonna have to explain this.
Fortunately, I have a video where I talk about this. It's coming up next, after our intro.
You're being extremely vague.
You seemed a little confused.
I know what the intro is.
Alright, so let's go ahead and cover
Dynamic Boy 1 and 2, apparently.
Thank you. Yes, Dynamic Boy 1 and Dynamic Boy 2, followed by the Project Superpowers, and you'll see how it following the second Dynamic Boy makes a hell of a lot more sense on this episode of
Lost Heroes of the Golden Age.
You had to squeeze it in there, didn't you?
That's what she said.
Let's get going. Now, there are two people who identify themselves as Dynamic Boy. The first one, Dynamic Boy, Kent Banning, first appeared in Dynamic Comics number 2 in 1941. This was published by Chesler. Now, he didn't have any connections with the original Dynamic Man, which is someone I will cover later. His origin was he did a heroic act that led to him almost dying, and then he was given a formula that allows him to overcome any obstacle. Among these abilities, he was given super strength, speed, flying, and I'll cover his first issue, which is an origin story, so we'll be able to get into him. Now, the other Dynamic Boy, which is actually the one that Dynamite Entertainment was based off of, wouldn't appear until 1944. Now, one of the reasons there's such a gap in between these two is Dynamic Comic Books, after number 3, would go into hiatus for a number of years and wouldn't come back until 1944. A number of the features that were appearing on the Dynamic Comics would not come back. Two of those were Dynamic Boy and Lady Satan. So, number 3, hiatus for a few years, would come back with issue number 8. Now, there was 2 appearances of the original Dynamic Boy, but a number of other appearances of the second one. Now, the second Dynamic Boy is Ricky Mcquaid. He first appeared in Dynamic Comics number 11 in 1944, both under Chesler. Now, the creator of both of these characters are both unknown. Now, the Dynamic Boy that would appear second was a sidekick / partner to the original Dynamic Boy. He was actually the younger, Dynamic Man. He was actually the younger brother of Dynamic Man. Now, this was kind of a new concept. When you were considered a sidekick, you had less powers than the person that you were sidekick with, and you weren't related, but they had the exact same powers, which included super strength. Now, they say invulnerability, but I doubt that, because there was one episode or issue where they were threatened to be shot, and they gave themselves up. Now, obviously, if they were invulnerable, they wouldn't be worrying about bullets. Do I believe they were highly durable? Yes. Do I believe they were invulnerable? No. So, we will cover the first appearance of the second Dynamic Boy. Now, when he appeared in the comic books, he was just there. There was no origin story for him. They only say in later issues that he was given the same powers of his brother in much the same way, but the Dynamic Man that would appear in 1944 was kind of a different format that they did for Dynamic Man. They changed a lot of him. So I think that him having the brother was retconned. And then we'll go ahead and we'll cover the appearance in Project Superpowers, which I believe gave Ricky a lot more depth of character than in the original stories of his Golden Age appearances, and we'll go ahead and cover that as well. So let's get into the first Dynamic Boy's first appearance before we get to the first appearance of the second Dynamic Boy. We start with the splash page. Dynamic Boy. Endowed with the ability to overcome all physical obstacles, Kent Banning, the Dynamic Boy, pits his strength and cunning on the side of law in order to battle the forces of evil. First panel, recess time, finds the schoolhouse deserted as the children enjoy the use of the playground. And we see a whole bunch of the kids playing. And then, soon to be our hero, fire! The school is on fire! They rush an emergency crew there, and the children walk out in an orderly fashion because they've been trained for this. Someone yells out, help, and they find out that there's still a girl on the top floor. Our hero hears the police say that they're not going to send a man in there because it's a suicide mission, so he runs in, saying, orphans like me have nothing to lose. Besides, rather than go into the orphanage next week, and then we go, stop, the building's going to fall. He rushes into the building anyways, exclaiming that his life isn't worth as much as theirs because he's an orphan. That's kind of a depressing sentiment. He makes it to the top floor as the stairs collapse behind him, exclaiming that the building's getting weaker. He finds the girl and tosses her out the window. Just then, the school collapses on the young boy. The father of the girl, apparently she's not an orphan, says, I'm Dr. Brown. It's my daughter he saved. Find the body and have it sent to my laboratory. We'll do all we can. That must have been something for the 1940s, because I'm pretty sure you don't send kids to laboratories. You send them to the coroner if they die. So we come to the panel and it says, and hours later, the doctor works frantically over the limp form of the young lad. My medical knowledge is useless. Perhaps the fluid given to me by a dying llama will do it. Of course. And he goes, either I restore the invincible life of the boy or sacrifice myself in death for failure. So it sounds like if he doesn't revive the boy, he's going to kill himself, and he will leave his daughter an orphan. It boggles the mind. Just then the daughter comes in and asks if anything is wrong, and the doctor says, no, the life endowed with no, my child, he lives, endowed with the life of the mighty powers. And then they just decide to call him Dynamic Boy, and suddenly, not knowing whether he was going to live or die, she creates a costume for him. Now we find out that there is a special election going on, and there is this guy who wants to be the mayor. Now, the current mayor, Mayor Norris, and his fiancée listen to the radio broadcasts of this guy campaigning and how the town is turned against him with the orphanage fire. Apparently, this new guy campaigning for mayor gets elected, but we have no basis for time because they don't tell us how much time has passed. Then a mysterious man approaches the fiancée of the former mayor and says that he wants to buy the house, and she says he's not selling it. Later that night, the fiancée and the former mayor are walking, and a lot of hooligans come up to stop them in the streets. I guess they're going to try and force them into something. She screams, and for some reason, Dynamic Boy is at the other end of the street, and he starts to go towards the screams. And suddenly he realizes that he can fly. I don't understand how that's a physical obstacle, but now he can fly. Now he's beating up the thugs, and now he has super strength. One tries to stab him, and the blade breaks. Now, you see, that's the only thing I can equate to his power. Of course the blade would break. He punches a guy through the glass window, and then he says something really weird. "You shouldn't have kept me. I wanted to complete the job." And they know who he is. "Thanks for your help, Dynamic Boy." I don't understand the whole context of what's going on there. They know of him. They don't know of him. I'm not going to dwell into this. So later that night, the goons are outside the house. And I guess the former mayor leaves for a little while, and his fiancée is alone. They break through a window, and they want her to sign the deed to the house, but she says she won't until they hold a gun to her head. She does eventually sign over the house, and the doctor that saved the young boy's life is there the next day. "You're moving away, Julia? I can't believe it. Why?" And she makes up some bullshit story about how she doesn't want to be here anymore, and they're going to put a factory up, and they find out that against the town charter, they can't put a factory up where the building is. So later that day, Dynamic Boy busts into the building and finds out that the new mayor that they just elected is working with the hooligans, and they're going to sell the property for a lot of money. So it's a property scam. Dynamic Boy busts in, beat up all the bad guys, ducks out of the way while one of the other bad guys hits the mayor in the face with a chair. Get him, he knows too much, stop him, or we'll all be all right. Or you're right, you'll all be. The wording is weird. He picks up the desk and throws it at him, grabs the new mayor, and delivers him to Doc Brown and the former mayor, where he confesses about how he burned down the orphanage in order to get the town turned against the mayor so he can get the property and sell it for a lot of money. At the very end, the new mayor's back, I guess, and he says something that would be a classic trope in Golden Age comics. "Thanks to the little boy, Dynamic Boy. Speaking of Dynamic Boy, that lad with your daughter, Doc, reminds me of him. Oh no, that's just my adopted son, Kent." It's these people somehow not wearing a mask, but nobody notices that in their civilian clothes that they're someone different. Now, in the next issue, it's a simple story. It's all about a doctor who, wearing a mask, teams up with this creature called the Horrible, and they're stealing pharmaceutical products from other doctors so they can sell them to criminals so they can get high. It's a simple, quick, and concise story, and Dynamic Boy ends up coming up on top. And at the end, they also exclaim, "Hey, Dynamic Boy looks like your boy." And he goes, "No, it can't be my boy. He was somewhere else." But that would be the last appearance. Now, I know he's credited in appearing in issue number 13 as well. That is just a reprint of the first story, but in a different colored costume with short shorts, which I'm not a fan of those. So that's how that ends. Just the two appearances. Now let's get into the Dynamic Boy that they modeled Project Superpowers off of, which I do believe I've mentioned a couple times. Now we get to the first appearance of Dynamic Boy in issue number 11, which is weird because issues 12 and 13 would be two reprints of the early Dynamic Man stories from the first three comics, but they wouldn't bring Dynamic Man Boy back until issue 14. Okay, so what weird secrets changed ageless corpses into mad slaves of the evil genius? Were the Aztec kings immune to death? Terror gripped the city until Dynamic Man defends the curse of the walking dead. And in further stories after that, they would mention Dynamic Man and Dynamic Boy because they were a partnership. So we start off to see what our evil madman is. He's talking about resurrecting kings and becoming one. And after two panels of him just talking to himself, later that next day, This guy goes, "The three kings are gone, stolen. How can I explain this to the board of trustees, Adele? Their ancient vows to live again. Could it be possible, Dr. Clayton?" And then they're talking about, they're just mummies. They couldn't come to life. And then at the back gate, there seems to be corpses walking on their own. There seems to be a gala happening that night at the museum, and the cops open fire and nothing happens to them. They start to rob the guests and take their jewelry from them. And then I guess Adele says, "I knew it would happen. Our only hope is to call on Dynamic Man. And on the radio you can hear, bullets and tear gas have failed to halt the mad rampage of these weird monsters. Their loot is mounting to millions as..." And then we cut to Dynamic Man and Dynamic Boy wearing the same costumes and short shorts. I'm not a fan of that. Now, they talk to Adele and find out that Dr. Clayton has left, I guess, to pursue the mummies, and leaves them instructions. So they fly off, and Dynamic Man, that's not a way to fly. Okay, they encounter the mummies, and they find out how strong and seemingly indestructible the mummies happen to be. And Dynamic Boy gets captured by the main bad guy, which really makes... And then Dynamic Man gets knocked out from behind, which really makes me skeptical on their indestructibility. If he was indestructible, how does he get knocked out? Okay, later, a car is speeding towards Dynamic Man, doesn't see him, and he uses his super strength to stop it in his tracks, which I have no doubt about his super strength. They find out it's Dr. Clayton who was pursuing the mummies, and he didn't see Dynamic Man. So it's a good thing he didn't run over him, because I don't believe he's indestructible. Highly durable, yes. Then in the lab, we see that the mad scientist is using rays on the mummy, and he says that he's going to do it to Dynamic Boy as well. Dynamic Man pops in and stops the madman, brings down one of the corpses, and he frees Dynamic Boy. As they find out that these corpses, let's see, Zando's head must have snapped off when he fell. There's no blood. His flesh is hard and dry like red limestone. Bram left this one soaking in an electrolyte solution. Look, he's dissolving. But these mummies were stolen. Where'd he find a third? They talk about how it looks like these mummies are falling apart, and they follow where the mad scientist is at, and it looks like Dr. Clayton shot him. Drop the gun, Clayton. Dynamic Boy, get back, or I'll let you have it. Let's see. You escape from the dead kings, but don't waste your breath. You're finished. I get it now. You called me because you were afraid Bram was double-crossing you, so it looks like Dr. Clayton was behind the whole situation of the mummies, and he thought the mad scientist was going to turn against him. They find the last mummy, and they knock out Dr. Clayton, and the Dynamic Man and Dynamic Boy capture Dr. Clayton and leave a note so that the police will know what Dr. Clayton was up to. So even though he said Dynamic Man needed to be part of the case, it ended up being his downfall in the end. So they stopped the mummy, they stopped the bad guys, and it's the first introduction of the Dynamic Boy. Now, Dynamic Boy and Dynamic Man would stop a number of crimes. It seems in this one that Dynamic Man was the coach of a school, and Dynamic Boy is his younger brother, which seems to be on the team. They can fly and they do have super strength, but there have been many times when I call their invulnerability into question because they look like they're scared of bullets. So let's get into Project Superpowers. Now, Project Superpowers is a large graphic novel. It is a lot of great stories put together. It is a number of converging plot lines that all come together in the end. And Dynamic Boy has... he's not really one of the main characters, but his arc is pretty significant into the story for one of the major bad guys they have to defeat. We find out really early on that the Dynamic family is nothing but robots, and the adult superheroes are not teaming up with their sidekicks at the beginning, and they end up killing Dynamic Boy. But the public doesn't know that they're robots, so they actually think that Dynamic Boy is dead. Later on, we will be following the kid superheroes, where Kid Terror has rejoined them. But what we didn't know at the time, and to find out later, that this Kid Terror is actually Dynamic Boy disguised as Kid Terror. Now, he starts to say negative thing about the adult superheroes and start to sow seeds of discontent to make the sidekicks not trust the main protagonist heroes. And one of the things I find funny about this is Sparky is with the kids, but Blue Beetle isn't part of Project Superpowers. So without Blue Beetle, what's the point of Sparky? Anyways, I digress. We later find that Catman, who has gone very feral, does not like Kid Terror, because I guess he can sense that he's a robot. At one point, he rips a huge chunk off of Kid Terror's face, and that's when it's revealed to us that he is a robot and Dynamic Boy. After the statue subdues Catman, which I really wish I had this story, I really wish I had these comics when I was reviewing Catman, gets stopped and thrown into a cage, and Kid Terror walks off on his own and says, "Hey, I'm going to bandage my face up." And then we get a flashback scene where we see the Dynamic Boy in a robe, which is 2 days after the funeral, finds Kid Terror, shoots him in the heart, and takes over his identity. Later on, as Dynamic Boy starts to get closer to Kitten, and it pisses off Catman, we find that Kid Terror comes out of the grave. He didn't actually die, and he's like, "Dynamic Boy, I am going to kill you." Not knowing that Dynamic Boy is a robot. Later on, while they're having the battle for Zeus, Tim confronts and starts kicking the butt of Dynamic Boy, and Catman decides that he wants to help out as too. And it's about this time that Zeus, yes, they are fighting Zeus, like I said, you have to read this, unleashes a massive amount of power, and all the superheroes fall to the ground, except for Dynamic Boy. I guess maybe the shock to his system decided that he wanted to do good, or whatever. He stands up to Zeus and he says, "I eat your electricity for breakfast. When are you going to serve the main course?" And then Zeus is just like, "Oh, you want to play with me?" He shoots down more energy, and Dynamic Boy stores up the power and blasts it into the ground to bring all the superheroes back to convalescence, because, as I said, they've all been knocked out by Zeus's power, but Dynamic Boy channels the power through him, blasts it through the ground so everybody else wakes up. And this would be the last run for Dynamic Boy. Zeus ends up getting beaten by Prometheus's flame ultimately in the end. Before that, though, Kitten comes over to Dynamic Boy as he's slowly fading away for good, and thanks him for, basically helping us out in the last minute. "You used to be a hero at one time like Dynamic Man. It's nice to see you be a hero again." And Dynamic Man hears this speech and decides, "I'm a hero, damn it!" And he goes off to help fight Zeus before Prometheus's flame ultimately subdues him. So he had a bit of an importance, because if it wasn't for him, Zeus would have ultimately defeated all the heroes. So a bit more of a significant role than other heroes that I have described lately. And that is the entire tale of Dynamic Boy to his first start to what would be his last appearance. Well, that does it for this episode of Lost Heroes of the Golden Age. I've got more requests on the way, which I'm going to be doing those. If you have any requests of people that you'd like to see, of characters that I haven't covered, or maybe characters that I have covered, but I didn't do enough of a good coverage, because there are some early ones before I was able to access the comic books that I could do a better review on today. So if you have any requests of older ones that I could redo, or new ones that I have yet to do, just let me know in the comments. And until next time, I'll be seeing you.